Unit 5, Quantum and Conscious Will. Section 1, Compatibilism and Libertarianism. Dennett is a champion of compatibilism. This is the philosophical doctrine that free will is compatible with determinism. He says, agent causation is a frankly mysterious doctrine, positing something unparalleled by anything we discover in the causal processes of chemical reactions, nuclear fissions and fusions, magnetic attractions, hurricanes, volcanoes, or such biological processes as metabolism, growth, immune reactions, and photosynthesis. Is there such a thing? Dennett goes on to say that libertarians insist that there must be. By doing so, however, Dennett claims they play into the hands of those at the other pole, the hard determinists, who are content to let the libertarians' uncompromising definition of free will set the term of the debate, so that they can declare, with science as their ally, so much the worse for free will. Dennett's point here is that hard determinists prefer the straw man version of free will as defined by supporters of the radical agent causation position. Dennett makes the point that if we do have free will, determinism must be false and indeterminism is true. And he goes on to say that since, thanks to quantum physicists, the received view among scientists today is that indeterminism is true at the subatomic level and by implication at higher levels under various specifiable conditions, this can look like a happy resolution of the problem. But there is a snag. How can the indeterminism of quantum physics be harnessed to give us a clear, coherent picture of a human agent exercising this wonderful free will? So the problem becomes, how exactly could subatomic indeterminism yield free will? Dennett explains different groups try to solve this problem differently. Some simply declare it to be somebody else's problem, a job for neuroscientists perhaps, or physicists. They take a top-down view. A human agent is free if the agent's choice is not determined by the total set of physical conditions that obtained prior to the choice. Another smaller group is represented by Robert Kane in his 1996 book, The Significance of Free Will. Kane provides a radical libertarian account, resulting in what he calls ultimate responsibility. Kane begins with the familiar claim that if determinism is true, then every decision I make is an effect, ultimately, of chains of causes leading back into times before I was born. Dennett argues that determinism is not the same as causation, that knowing that a system is deterministic tells you nothing about the interest in causation or lack of causation among the events that transpire within it. Dennett admits that this is a controversial conclusion. flying in the face of a long tradition. It may even be seen as simply an eccentric recommendation about how to use the word cause. So Dennett suggests that we temporarily set it aside and see what happens if instead we stick with tradition and treat determinism as the thesis that each state of affairs causes the succeeding state. Dennett points out that for 2 millennia, philosophers have insisted that free will is an all or nothing issue. Either we have free will or we don't. Consequently, any compromise proposals suggesting that determinism is compatible with at least some kinds of free will have been resisted as dangerously deceptive and submersive of morality. Dennett says, libertarians have long insisted that the compatibilist sorts of free will I am describing and defending are not the real thing at all, and not even an acceptable substitute for the real thing, but rather a wretched subterfuge in the oft-quoted phrase of Immanuel Kant. Dennett then refers to Robert Kane's book, The Significance of Free Will. Kane claims that freedom is a term with many meanings, and he says that even if we lived in a determined world, we could meaningfully distinguish persons who are free from such things as physical restraint, addiction or neurosis, coercion or political oppression from persons not free from these things. And we could allow that these freedoms would be worth preferring to their opposites, even in a determined world. But in addition to these freedoms from, humans also have, according to Kane, a capacity for freedom too. And this kind of freedom definitely is incompatible with determinism. On the other hand, it is the most significant kind of freedom and certainly worth wanting. Kane defines this form of freedom as the power to be the ultimate creator and sustainer of one's own ends or purposes. Dennett extends this concept of freedom too to include moral responsibility. In order to achieve this status, he says, I have to be the ultimate source of my decision, and that can be true only if no earlier influences were sufficient to secure the outcome. In other words, my decisions have to be truly up to me and not the result of genetic predisposition or environmental conditioning. Dennett then refers to the famous sign Harry Truman had on his White House desk, "The buck stops here." And then it says that a human mind has to be a place where the buck stops. According to Kane, only libertarianism can provide this kind of free will, the kind that can give us ultimate responsibility. Kane says that a mind is an arena of willings, choices, decisions, or efforts, and if these willings were in turn caused by something else, so that the explanatory chains could be traced back further to hereditary or environment, to God or fate, then the ultimacy would not lie with the agents, but with something else. Dennett, however, has a very specific and, for him, decisive critique of this position, which he calls the retreat of the self into a walled enclave within which all the serious work of authorship has to be done. This, he says, parallels another retreat into the center of the brain. This refers to Dennett's notion of the Cartesian theater. This is the imaginary place in the center of the brain where it all comes together for consciousness. Dennett is adamant that there is no such place, and that any theory that tacitly presupposes that there is should be set aside at once as on the wrong track. Dennett's point is that all the work supposedly done inside this imaginary Cartesian theater must, in reality, be distributed in time and space around the brain. And he says that Kane has a double problem. Not only has he got to figure out some way to get the undetermined quantum event to be not just in you, but yours. He wants, above all, for the decision to be up to you. But if the decision is undetermined, it isn't determined by you, whatever you are, because it isn't determined by anything. Whatever you are, you can't influence the undetermined event. The whole point of quantum indeterminacy is that such quantum events are not influenced by anything. So, Dennett says, you have in some way to meaningfully incorporate this indeterminate event into your decision-making. But, he continues, in order to do this, there has to be more to you than just some mathematical point. You have to be someone. You have to have parts, memories, pains, beliefs and desires that you've acquired along the way. And then all those causal influences from the past, from outside, come crowding back in, contaminating the workshop, preempting your creativity, usurping control of your decision-making. In other words, Dennett is saying that only an empty mathematical point can have magical free will. If you have a biological history, it will determine your decisions. Extending this argument, Dennett says, if you make yourself as small as possible, you can externalize virtually everything. Then perhaps you can have magical free will. This approach, claims Dennett, pushes free will into a single moment, somewhere in the heart of an atom. This, as we have seen from other contributors, is a very inadequate perspective on quantum free will. But it's enough to persuade Dennett to dismiss any quantum involvement in it. Instead, he reasserts his compatibilist version of free will. He says, events in the distant past were indeed not up to me, but my choice now to go or stay is up to me because its parents, some events in the recent past, such as the choices I have recently made, were up to me because their parents were up to me, and so on. Not to infinity, but far enough back to give myself enough spread in space and time so that there is a me for my decision to be up to. Dennett then asks what the point of libertarianism might be said to amount to. His answer is essentially nothing. The Kane type of quantum libertarianism doesn't amount to a difference that makes a difference. He says, an indeterministic spark occurring at the moment we make our most important decisions couldn't make us more flexible, give us more opportunities, make us more self-made or autonomous in any way that could be discerned from inside or outside. So why should it matter to us? In his 1949 book, The Concept of Mind, Gilbert Ryle dismissed fears that mechanistic theories in science somehow undermined the notion of human free will. He compared the laws of nature to the rules of chess, pointing out that the existence of these laws does not mean that there's no scope is left in the playing of chess for the exercise of intelligence and choice. Hodgson criticizes this position of Ryle's as follows. The rules of chess generally leave open alternatives concerning the piece to be moved and the square to which it is to be moved. And it is precisely this which leaves room for the exercise of intelligence and choice. However, the mechanistic laws of pre-quantum physics leave open no such alternatives. Given all relevant initial conditions and the relevant laws, only one result is possible at any particular later time. It is only in quantum physics that quantitative physical laws of nature leave open true alternatives, given all relevant initial conditions. It seems to me that Hodgson's critique here is entirely correct. Ryle and the other compatibilists, such as his student Dennett, want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to believe that we live in a fully determined world, but human beings are still able to exercise free will. The paradox of their position is especially acute since they specifically rule out quantum physics as its solution. My view is that some version of compatibilism is correct, but that it is precisely quantum physics which renders this doctrine non-paradoxical.